Okay, chapter 19 is called Escape, and it's going to note kind of a shift in the book in terms of the action and what's happening with the characters. Dusk came to JD's house, followed soon by the pizzas. Sarah chewed slowly through 4 slices, her eyes never leaving the diary pages. Night fell and JD occupied himself on the internet. Aidan continued without success, his efforts to cause the Stratocaster to finally produce something that sounded even vaguely resembling music. Finally, he gave up and started watching TV. An hour passed and a good part of a second hour, and at last Sarah closed the diary and stood. "Okay," she announced. Aidan and JD turned to her. "Okay, what?" "Okay, I read it all." "And?" "A lot of it I don't understand, but I think I'm getting the rough idea of things." "And?" "Well, it's pretty weird." "Weird how?" said Aidan. "Okay, well, like Molly says in the letter in the front, the Starcatchers were looking for a way to protect the island. So one of the Starcatchers, a guy that Molly calls T, who I think is some kind of professor, suggested that they should get in touch with this guy she called E. So in 1905, Molly went to see this E in a place called Bern." "Bern?" said Aidan. "Bern, B-E-R-N. Where is that anyway?" "I think it's in Switzerland," said JD. "You said 1905? "Yeah, is that important?" "Not sure. Go on." "Okay, so this E guy worked for a long time on this, couple years. There was a lot of back and forth between him and the Starcatchers, but finally he came up with a solution to protect the island, which was, well, this is the part that's really weird." "What is it?" said Aidan. "A bridge." JD nodded. "I remember reading that. I think that's exactly where I decided it was nonsense and gave up." "A bridge to the island? I thought it's in the middle of the ocean somewhere." "Why would a bridge help isolate it? Wouldn't that bring people to it?" "I don't think it's a regular bridge," said Sarah. "This guy E was making it in his laboratory." "Huh?" said JD. "And he used star stuff to make it." "Star stuff? To build a bridge?" "How do you know it was star stuff?" said JD. "You should have kept reading," said Sarah. "Molly called it material, but it had to be star stuff. She says the Starcatchers gave E some material from the supply held by M. That's got to be McGill." "Okay, so they're isolating an island with a bridge, which they're making in a laboratory using star stuff." "I think that's what the diary said." "That doesn't make any sense," said Aidan. JD cleared his throat. "I think maybe, in a kind of incredible way, it does make sense," he said. "How so?" said Aidan. "I can't believe I'm saying this," said JD, "and if I hadn't seen the star stuff for myself, I wouldn't be saying this." Sarah and Aidan waited. "I think I know what kind of bridge we're talking about. I also think I know who E is, who he has to be, although I admit I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around it." "Who? Who is it?" begged Sarah. "If I'm right," said JD, "E is Einstein." "Albert Einstein?" said Aidan. "No, Buddy Einstein. Of course Albert Einstein. But how? I mean, how could..." "I'll explain, but if you're going to understand, I have to teach you a little theoretical physics." Sarah sat on the sofa and patted a spot next to her for Aidan to sit down. "Teach away, Professor." "Okay. So, to begin with, what we think of as bang!" Sarah screamed as the front door burst open with jagged pieces of wood of the door frame flew across the room. A large man wearing padding and a plastic face shield hurtled into the room, others right behind him all yelling, "Police! Get down!" 3 of the policemen took JD, taking him down. Others grabbed Aidan and Sarah, and in seconds they were being hustled out of the house. There was a police van waiting in the driveway. Sarah and Aidan were seated on one of the 2 facing benches inside. The front seats had 2 officers, a male and a female. Between the officers, Sarah and Aidan had a metal divider. JD was in handcuffs and was led to the van by 2 policemen who opened the back door and put him inside. They sat him on the bench and put the handcuffs and chained him to the floor. One of the police officers handed his weapon to a fellow officer and sat on a bench with JD. The other cop closed the door. "You don't understand," said Sarah. "This man is helping us. He didn't do anything." "You're going to be all right, kids. You're safe now." "But we were safe. He didn't..." "We'll sort this out at the station with your parents." "Our parents are coming?" "They're on their way from Pittsburgh. They're very worried," said the officer. "You had a lot of people worried," said the female police officer. "Your pictures are all over the TV." "Oh, no." "No, that was good," said the officer. "People saw you leaving Jadwin Hall with that creep back there. That's how we tracked you down." He's not a creep, said Aidan. Like I said, we'll figure it out at the station. This is bad, whispered Sarah. Tell me, he whispered back. They're never going to believe us. He nodded toward JD. I don't know what they're going to do to him. She glanced back. JD was staring at the van floor, his face white with shock. A few hours ago, he didn't even know Sarah and Aidan existed. Now he was facing arrest and maybe jail because he tried to help us, she thought. It's not fair. I know. You two okay back there? Said the female cop. No, said Sarah softly. Tears were burning in her eyes. One tear fell on Molly's diary, and Sarah realized that she'd been gripping it all along, so tightly that her hand hurt. She realized that in her other hand, she was gripping her backpack. She looked at Aidan. He was looking at the backpack, too. Now we switch scenes back to Lester Armstrong. Lester was following the van. He'd just been a step behind the police since he'd gotten to Princeton. He reached the library just after dark, and as he pulled up, a man and woman were hustling out of the building and climbed into an unmarked, illegally parked Chevy. So obviously a police car, it might as well have been had a lighter up rack on the top of it. Detectives, Armstrong figured. No way that was a coincidence. They had to be on the trail of the Cooper kids. The Chevy started rolling and was joined a few seconds later by a Princeton police patrol car with its sirens blaring. Armstrong followed in the Escalade, keeping a safe distance. The police were moving fast. They obviously found something out. His plan was to stick close to them, just close enough, looking for an opportunity to leapfrog the investigation and rescue the kids for himself. The police headed to the campus, and they followed them to a residential neighborhood not far from where they were. Uh-oh, Armstrong thought as he saw the police van, the SWAT team. This was not good. If the kids were in the house, there was no way he'd get to them ahead of the SWAT team. By the look at it, he'd wasted his day. The raid was efficient, professional, 15 to 20 seconds, and it was all over. Armstrong saw his fee going with it, unless he slammed the Escalade into gear with a plan forming in his mind. The Coopers wouldn't reach Princeton until the next day. What parents would want their kids held in a police station overnight? Wouldn't they be happier to have their kids released into his custody and for him to put them up in a nice hotel until they arrived? If they hadn't left yet, they might even authorize him to escort the kids home, shortening the process and get this whole thing over with. He fished his cell phone out of his pocket and dialed. He was counting on the paperwork to slow the police down so that he would be the first to give the Coopers the good news and his first to receive their gratitude. He could practically smell the money. Aidan and Sarah were communicating with their eyes. She was looking, nodding with her eyebrows. Aidan's eyes tracked slowly back to the steel grid separating them from JD, then forward into the front seat. He touched his belt and nodded toward the male cop. Sarah looked and saw a key ring clipped to the officer's wide police belt. One key was smaller than the others, silver in color. Sarah figured there must be a handcuff key. She looked at Aidan and nodded to get it. He pointed at the backpack again, then at the seatbelt, and at the seatbelts worn by the other two officers in the front seat. Okay, she nodded. Aidan looked at the backpack, then at her, and he mouthed the word, now. Sarah, her hand trembling, slowly unzipped the backpack. She slipped her hand inside and found the gold box, and she nodded to Aidan. Aidan checked to make sure his seatbelt was fastened. The male cop looked back. What have you got there? Is that gold? Sarah closed her eyes and gave the wheel a quarter turn, tilting the box just slightly. The van filled with a brilliant golden light and a musical sound. Aidan, his eyes also closed, leaned forward and felt around for the seatbelt latches, and he quickly released them both. Sarah turned the wheel shut. The light was less brilliant. Both officers were still in their seat, but now the male officer was upside down. He didn't seem bothered by it. He was humming happily. The female officer who'd been driving was floating on her back against the windshield. Hello back there, she said. I love you, Janine, said the other officer. I've always loved you. I know, Tommy, she said, but I'm driving. She gestured vaguely towards the steering wheel. Wait, I'm not driving. Who's driving? Sarah and Aidan were also giddy, but having therefore been there before, they were a bit more aware of what was happening. They found the fact that nobody was driving the van somewhat troubling. Aidan looked out the side window for a moment and saw nothing but night sky. Then a tree passed by, underneath the van. Sarah, I think you used a little too much. Armstrong was following the police van, 3 cars back. That's when he saw it. The van was flying. He stared open-mouthed as the van rose gracefully above everyone's head. That was when he rear-ended the car in front of him, which had just rear-ended the patrol car following the van, which had smashed into another civilian car whose driver had also been mesmerized by the flying van. The crash popped the hood open to Lester's car. He jumped out of his Escalade and looked around at the sky and picked out the van. In front of him, the cops were scrambling out the wrecked patrol car. Their eyes went to the van, disappearing in the night sky, and his brain struggled to process what he was seeing. He knew two things right away. One, this was no longer an ordinary missing kids case. The other, that he wasn't going away until he found out exactly what it was. The police van was drifting slowly back to Earth, but the three officers were not worried about it at all. The female in front, Janine, was continuing her floating flirtation with Tommy in the back. The third officer was still upside down at the moment he was singing what sounded like Miley Cyrus. He didn't notice when Aidan leaned forward and unclipped the keyring to his belt. The van was now 50 feet off the ground. Aidan and Sarah unfastened their seatbelts and slid the van door open, easing themselves out. Floating, they held on. Sarah opened the door. JD, still upside down, was smiling at them. "Hey," he said, as if he were sitting in his office. "Isn't this great?" "Terrific," said Aidan. "Now come on," he said, pulling JD. "Sarah, get his other arm." "This is great," said JD. "Where are we going?" "Where are we going?" "I have no idea," said Sarah. "I love the way you always have a plan," said Aidan. "Oh, just look at the full moon," said JD. In western Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, a farmer, having finished his nightly rounds, closed the barn door. He was staring back at the house, and from the west he heard a deep whooshing sound. But the night was still. The sound was closer now, and the farmer moved away from the house so that he would have unobstructed view to the west. He froze when he saw it was clearly by the full moon, a black cloud, low to the ground, coming fast. But what kind of cloud moved like that or made such a noise? The farmer wanted to run, a reaction that embarrassed himself as he prided himself on being a tough man and a man of common sense. He willed himself to hold still as the cloud came closer and closer. Birds. He couldn't see it now, but they were birds. Ravens they looked like, huge ravens, so many of them. They swept in, blotting out the moon, the beating of their wings. The farmer stood still. The door opened to the house, and the farmer's wife called outside. She saw him standing motionless in the moonlight. "Jake, that noise, what was that?" "Birds," he said. "Birds making all that noise?" "Yeah." He was still looking at the sky. She watched him for a few more moments. "Is everything all right?" "I don't know," he said. And that's the end of the chapter. So whether it's intentional or unintentional, the authors are making some nods back to some of the previous books that we've read. Hopefully the scene with Aidan, Sarah, and JD getting captured by the police takes you back to Peter's first experience in London when he's captured by Humdrake and they need to steal the keys while floating to escape. Similarly, Lester appears to be taking on the role of kind of Slank/Stash in finding out about the star stuff and wanting to know more about this mystery and kind of getting sucked in to this idea of chasing money and chasing after the Cooper kids as a means of becoming or getting some wealth. Then, of course, there is the trio of Sarah, Aidan, and JD. Sarah and Aidan have the Peter and Molly sort of feel to them, but of course, I feel like JD adds that third wheel that could be George, provides some scientific insight in terms of his knowledge of physics, similar to how George knew so much about astronomy. And so these are what we would call parallels, where they kind of parallel back and forth between the stories. The final scene of the book is important with the birds because, of course, Lancaster, Pennsylvania is west of where the kids are, but Ambra is getting closer. So they close the chapter by letting you know that Ambra is on his way to the Cooper children to make matters worse. So we will be back Monday with a read aloud for the next chapter, and I hope you are enjoying the book as much as I am.